Hi guys, and welcome to our channel. My name's Imad and I'm a tutor at Study Buddies. We are an established education centre based in East London, providing quality after-school tuition to children ages 6 to 18, from primary school through to A-levels. We specialise in maths, English, sciences and 11 plus tutoring, providing small group and one-to-one classes from just £6.50 an hour. If you'd like to know more about us, then please visit our website at www.studybuddies.co.uk. You'll find our details on the screen. So today we'll be looking at a couple of rhyming techniques. We're going to start off with standard rhyming and then look at more partial forms of rhyme. We'll be looking at the effects of each of these as we go along. So let's start off with standard rhyme. So standard rhyme is when two or more words have the same sound in the middle and end of the last syllable, including both vowel and consonant sounds in that final syllable. So if you're an English speaker, you'll probably know how regular rhyming works. But essentially the important bit about it is that there are two or more words, and at the end of these words, you've got the same vowel and the same consonant sound. Now let's take a look at this example from Lord Byron's The Destruction of Sennacherib. It says, "The Assyrians came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold." Now, fold and gold rhyme because we've got the same old sound being repeated. They're both one-syllable words, but the second part of the word, this old sound that's being repeated, it contains the vowel, which is O, and then the consonant sound, which is the LD. It's got both of these components, and these components are repeated, so it forms a standard rhyme. So a standard rhyme can have a lot of different uses, and it's important not to generalize the points that I make to all poetry. All poems have different contexts, and the rhyme is used in different ways in different poems. So it's important to judge yourself how rhyme works and creates different effects. One possible effect of standard rhyming is that it draws parallels between the meanings of the words through sound. So because we know that two words sound similar, it leads us to compare the words or consider how they might be similar in meaning as well as in sound. Another thing about rhyme is that it can help make the poem seem more structured and more organized, sometimes more fluid as well, more easy to read. In Lord Byron's The Destruction of Sennacherib, he uses a consistent kind of rhyme. He uses rhyming couplets and he uses a certain meter, a certain length of each line, and it's organized in this way so it makes it easy to read and the rhythm is consistent and flowing. And that leads us to our third use of standard rhyming, which is that sometimes it's just more pleasing to read when a poem rhymes. There's something about having repeated sound in the way that we're reading words. It can help emphasize the effects that are in the poem and make the poem one fluid piece of work rather than just a collection of different sentences. Now let's move on to a couple of other forms of rhyme, which are partial rhymes. So standard rhyme we consider as full rhyme. It's a complete kind of rhyme. Whereas the other two techniques that we're going to go through, half rhyme and assonance, they're forms of partial rhyme. So they are missing something that regular rhyme has. Now let's start off with half rhyme. Half rhyme is when the final syllables between two words correspond only in consonant sounds and not in vowel sounds. So where we had in standard rhyming, the vowels and the consonants both match at the end. In half rhyme, it's only the consonants that match. Now when we read this out, we see that the rhyme is not as complete. It feels unsatisfactory for a reason, and that can lead to a lot of different effects. Now let's take a look at this example from Mary Casey's The Class Game. It says, "How can you tell what class I'm from? 'Cause we live in a corpy not like some." Now, from and some, they don't rhyme completely. It's there's a slight disjunction between the rhymes, because the O in from and the O in some are pronounced differently. Those two vowels don't rhyme. But the M at the end, they still rhyme. They're still the same M sound being pronounced, the consonant sound. So in this way, we've got a half rhyme, because the consonants at the end match, but the vowels at the end don't match. Now, half rhyme is quite useful for a variety of different reasons. Now, first of all, it's useful to create a sense of partiality or dissatisfaction. And by this I mean, in regular poetry, you've got full wholesome rhymes being created. So like we had in the last example with standard rhyming, we had fold and gold. That's a complete wholesome rhyme. Whereas in this example, we've got from and some. Now, when you read a lot of poetry, you notice the custom of wholesome rhyme being created, especially in some older poetry. So where you've got something like from and some, you notice that disjunction between the two words. Half rhyme is about creating that sense of dissatisfaction in the reader. You subvert their expectations of having a whole rhyme. Just because two words sound similar, it doesn't mean they're going to rhyme. And half rhyme exploits that, and it uses that to create dissatisfaction and adds that to the tone of the poem. Now this leads on quite nicely to our second point, which is that half rhyme can be quite useful in exploring different ways of pronouncing words and different accents that we read poetry. So usually when we read a poem, we're going to read it in our own accent. Even if we're reading in our heads, it's going to be in our own accent. But then Mary Casey's The Class Game is all about exploring different areas of class, different ways that people speak, different ways that people behave. She was based near Liverpool initially, and I think she's written this poem in an accent that's natural to her. So when you read this poem in a London accent, from and some don't rhyme because it can only be a half rhyme because of the way that you pronounce the words. And I'm going to do a very bad impression of a sort of northern accent here, but if you spoke the poem in Mary Casey's way of speaking, from and some would then rhyme because you don't pronounce some in a London accent, you pronounce it in a different way. So the O in som would match the O in from. And in that way, you have to adapt to the poet's way of speaking in order to create the full wholesome rhymes that you expect. If you are sort of stubborn in reading in your own way and insistent on your own sort of culture, then you have to then accept the half rhyme. And so I think Mary Casey's point is about being able to try and adjust or to try and explore and have an insight into other people's culture. And I think that ties in quite nicely to our next example. So next we're going to be looking at assonance. Now, assonance is another partial rhyme. It's when the final syllables between two words correspond in the vowel sounds instead of the consonants. So with half rhyme we had only the consonants match up at the end. With assonance, only the vowel sounds match up at the end. Now let's take a look at this example from John Agard's Half Caste. Now keep in mind that John Agard, he writes this in a Creole accent. So he's from the Caribbean and he writes this in a Creole accent. So when I read this, I'm not going to read completely in a London accent. I'm going to try and adjust to the poet's way of speaking. So he says, I dream half a dream, and when moon begin to glow, I half cast human being, cast half a shadow. So obviously, John Agard reads it in a certain way. I've tried to adjust my reading in order to create the assonance between dream and being. Now usually you would read being as human being, but in order to create the assonance, you have to read it in the same way that John Agard does. And in that way, you have to adjust to the poet's way of speaking in order for the poem to reach its full potential. So all the effects in the poem actually come through to us. Half caste is about race. It's all about someone of a mixed race background being treated like half a person. And so John Agard uses his accent in his poem. He writes in a way that isn't grammatically correct in terms of, you know, the very traditional way of speaking English, but it also forces us to unify our way of speaking with the way that he speaks, the accent in which he speaks. Now, the class and racial aspect of reading partial rhymes is very useful in GCSE EdXL poetry, but assonance can actually have a lot of different effects outside of the dimensions of race and pronunciation. In some cases, it creates certain tonal effects through the repetition of the vowel. So if we take like a heavy O sound, for example, doom and gloom, the heavy O sound in those two words, it adds to the sense of foreboding in the words doom and gloom. So they're already kind of heavy, dark words in terms of their meaning. But this O sound, doom and gloom, it adds to the effect of those words. So in that way, you can use sound and the repetition of sounds, especially vowels, to emphasize certain elements of the meaning in poetry as well. So that's all we've got for now. Next time we're going to be looking at rhyming structure. So we're going to be following on from rhyming techniques, but we're going to be looking at how different rhyming words are placed in the poem. So we might have rhyming couplers or alternate rhyme or so on. We're going to be looking at the different arrangement of rhyming patterns and how that influences the poem. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.